The Courtship of Harry Potter by Diana Williams. Chapter 11. Stolen Kisses. So, Harry, Seamus said, grinning at him across the breakfast table the next morning. I expect Professor Max is at the top of your list now, eh? Harry shrugged. It was a nice present. Nice! Dean said. Nice is your great aunt giving you hand-knitted socks for Christmas. That broom was incredible! Are you planning on taking it out again tonight? Ron asked, between a mouthful of toast. Maybe later, Harry said. I've got some reading I want to finish first. There was dead silence at the table, and he looked up to find all the Gryffindors at his end of the table staring at him. What? You'd rather study than fly? Ron asked, a stunned look on his face. Harry grinned at that. Well, no, but this is important too. And we've got Quidditch practice this afternoon, so we'll fly it then. Noting the crestfallen look on Ron's face, he added generously, You can take it out this morning, if you'd like. The look Ron gave him was its own reward. Really? Of course. He looked over at Seamus and Dean. You can use it too, but Ron is in charge. The three of them shouted at the hall, and Harry didn't even try to suppress the grin on his face. He turned his attention back to his breakfast, his thoughts on the letters he'd read last night. Although he'd stayed up half the night reading them, he felt pretty good this morning. His mother's writing had revealed her to be a warm, kind, and generous friend with a sharp wit and marvelous sense of humor. It was no wonder that Snape had loved her. The wonder was that Snape was in any way interested in her son. You were up late last night. Harry looked up surprised to see Neville sitting across from him. Yeah, didn't mean to keep you awake. You didn't. I only noticed because I woke up once and saw the light. It didn't keep me awake, though. There was an awkward silence for a few minutes, then Neville said, Was it his gift? I suppose he gave you a potion book or something. No. I mean, yes, it was Professor Snape's gift, but no, it wasn't a potion book. It was letters from my mother. Oh, and a book, too, one that she wrote. I don't suppose it ever was published, though. I'd have seen it in the library. Neville nodded. Any good? Don't know, really. I just glanced at a couple of the pages. No, I mean the letters. Oh, yes, they are. They were friends, you see, and she wrote to him during the breaks. He didn't go home during Christmas. He paused. He didn't seem to go anywhere. I mean, you'd think she'd say something about what he'd said in his letter back, but she only talks about him poring over his books. She was always trying to get him to come with them on their summer trips, but he turned her down. Got the feeling that his parents didn't approve of him hanging about with muggles, you know? Makes me feel a bit sorry for him, actually. He flushed as he realized that he was talking to Neville about the terror of his existence. Sorry, didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. We could talk about something else if you'd like. No, that's all right. Neville's mouth quirked up in a smile at the corner. I'd like to think it was once human at any rate. Harry laughed. Hasn't changed that much to go by Mom's letters. She was forever teasing him about his attitude and the way he ripped up at people. Said he needed her around to keep him even halfway civil. I can't imagine talking to Snape like that, Neville said with a slight shudder. Neither can I. But you do, Harry, Neville said, and he looked squarely at Harry. You have from the first day of class. You're not afraid to stand up to him, and I think that's why he likes you. Harry blinked. You must be daft. Snape doesn't like me. He detests me. He detests you so much that he's courting you. Not to mention giving you a present like that. Neville asked pointedly. With a wistful sigh, he said, I'd give anything to have something like that from my parents. He thought for a minute, then added, Well, almost anything. I wouldn't date Snape. I'm not dating Mr. Potter. Harry broke off, flushing red as he realized that the man they'd been discussing was standing behind him. Sir? Snape raised an eyebrow as he looked both of them over. Whatever have you two been talking about to look so guilty? He turned his attention solely to Harry and said, The headmaster and I will expect you in his office tonight at 8 for our second meeting. I assume that you have no prior plans. Wordlessly, Harry shook his head. Very well. He started to turn away, then looked back at them and said, I trust that whatever you are plotting will not involve any breaking of school rules. I would dislike having to rearrange my schedule around your detentions, Potter. A week ago, such a comment would have made Harry blurt out a heated rejoinder, but that was before the letters. Now he couldn't help but notice that the snarky sarcasm was actually amusing, and he grinned at Snape. I'll endeavor not to get caught, sir, so as not to ruin your plans. Snape raised his other eyebrow at that, and Harry could have sworn that the lips twitched in something that might have been a smile. Either that or indigestion. See that you do, Mr. Potter. He glanced over at Neville. Mr. Longbottom. They watched as he went off towards the head table in a billow of robes, and Harry idly wondered if Snape could teach him that trick. It was impressive as heck. Or maybe you had to be as tall as Snape was to pull it off successfully. Harry? Harry realized that Neville had been repeating his name and groaned as he covered his face with his hands. Oh, Merlin Neville. I'm dating Professor Snape. Neville gave him a lopsided grin. About time you noticed! Harry irritably thought that everyone seemed determined to keep him from returning to his room to finish reading. An owl had arrived from Sirius, full of conflicting advice on dealing with the suitors, as well as an offer to get some of the Order of the Phoenix chaps to introduce Harry to other suitors. Harry had to detour to the owlry to send him a quick reply asking him not to do that. Professor Spindly Worm had caught up with him on his way back from sending the owl and had solicited him for a meeting that night at 7:30. Draco Malfoy and his cohorts had blocked his escape up the main stairs to taunt him about his suitors, and only the arrival of Professor McGonagall had driven them off. However, his head of house had then wanted to talk to him about his plans for the future, and it was only by promising faithfully to report to her office at 7 that night for a discussion that he was able to get away. Once back in the Gryffindor dorm, he took out his mother's manuscript and sat looking at it for a few long moments. Part of him wanted to keep it to himself, to selfishly cherish this remnant of his mother, and part of him wanted to make sure that her work received the recognition it deserved. He doubted that Snape would have written that comment on the manuscript if it hadn't been truly good, friends or not, but the fact was the work was almost 20 years old. He had no way of knowing whether the material was outdated or not, but he knew someone who would know. Someone he'd seen working in a quiet corner of the common room as he passed through it. Carefully, he locked the letters back in his trunk and took the manuscript down to the common room. Hermione looked up at him as he approached, and she smiled. Hello, Harry. I thought you'd be out with the others. Harry sat down at the table. I need to ask your opinion about something. He set the manuscript down on the table and pushed it across to her. It was in the box. My mother wrote it. Hermione looked up at him in surprise, then down at the manuscript. Professor Flitwick told me once that Lily Evans was one of his best students. Would you like me to read it and tell you what I think? Yes, please. As she pulled the manuscript closer, Harry felt an irrational impulse to pull it away from her, and he clasped his hands tightly in his lap to resist the urge. I'd like to see about having it published, although it might need some reworking if the material is outdated. Would you consider helping me edit it? I'd make sure that you receive co-authorship credit, and I could pay you. Harry, Hermione said, interrupting him. It would be an honor. Thank you for asking. Carefully, she picked up the manuscript and began leafing through the pages. It's had a preservation spell cast on it. That should protect it against any damage, but I'll be very careful with it. Thanks, Harry said. He stood up, reluctant to leave this piece of his mother with anyone, but knowing it needed to be done. I've got to get to practice now. Hermione nodded, already absorbed in the manuscript. Harry hurried upstairs to grab his winter robes, then hurried outside to join his teammates. Professor McGonagall opened her office door and smiled at Harry, gesturing for him to enter. Thank you for coming, Mr. Potter, she said, gesturing for him to take a seat. To his surprise, instead of settling into her usual chair behind her desk, she took the seat next to him. He looked at her inquiringly. Mr. Potter, she began, then smiled faintly. Harry, we probably should have had this discussion a while back, but... Harry gave her a wry smile. But we weren't sure if I'd survive you-know-who, so there wasn't much point in looking into the future. Still might not be, for that matter. Well, you can hardly drift through your life, however long or short it is, she said briskly. Have you had any thoughts on what you'd like to do once you leave school? Harry sighed. The headmaster asked me that too, and I don't have a burning desire to do anything in particular. I like Quidditch, but I don't know if I want to spend years as a second-string seeker on a minor league team till a place opens up on a national team. I'm good at defense against the dark arts, but I don't want to be an Auror to kill people. I don't have a burning desire to teach, either. He shrugged. I suppose I'm just waiting for the right thing to come along. The right thing? Or the right person? Harry looked up, startled to see that McGonagall was intently studying him. I'm not expecting some knight in shining armor to come along and make everything easy for me. Harry, you have had a hard time dealing with everyone's expectations about defeating you-know-who. It would not be surprising if you wanted someone to take care of everything else for you. Harry frowned. So you think I'm buying into this whole Aratstes thing because I'm looking for someone to take care of me? Carefully, McGonagall said, I wouldn't blame you if you were, Harry. Everyone needs to know someone cares about him or her. I just want you to be certain that you are thinking with your head, not with other parts of your anatomy. He dropped his eyes, flushing a little at that, and she chuckled. I meant your heart, Mr. Potter, but yes, you shouldn't think with that other part of your anatomy either, no matter how tempting it might be. He lifted his head and fixed his eyes on her. What do you think I should do, Professor? McGonagall sighed. I'm afraid I can't make that decision for you, Harry. However, don't let anything or anyone, including your friends, rush you into deciding. When the choice is right, you will know it. Harry nodded, knowing that she was right, but also a little disappointed. It seemed that no one, including the headmaster Sirius and Professor McGonagall, was going to help him out in this situation. He was on his own. Again. There was a knock on the door, and McGonagall gave him a faint smile. That will be Professor Smidley-Wem. Are you ready? Harry nodded again, and she went to the door to let in the DADA instructor. Harry could see that Professor Max was in high spirits tonight. He greeted McGonagall with enthusiasm, going so far as to bestow a kiss to her cheek that Harry was amused to see it made her blush. Then he turned to Harry with equal enthusiasm, and for one horrific moment, Harry was afraid that Max was going to kiss his cheek as well. However, Max restrained himself to grasping Harry's hand and kissing the back of it, with a roguish look at McGonagall as he did. Well, Harry, Max said, taking the seat next to Harry's, but not releasing his hand. Did you like my present? Harry smiled, nodding enthusiastically. It's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And the way it flies. You won't see anything like it, Max said, winking at him. I had it custom made with the latest innovations, some that won't be on the market for years. You'll be able to fly circles around every other seeker. Unfortunately, Mr. Potter won't be able to use that broom as Gryffindor Seeker, McGonagall said. It would be completely unfair to the other teams, since they can't hope to equal its performance. Of course not, but that won't matter in the professional leagues, Max said, waving the hand that wasn't holding Harry's dismissively. He leaned slightly closer to Harry. That's what I wanted to discuss with you tonight. I've got a number of contacts within the Quidditch leagues, and I've lined up 2 potential offers. One is with the Cheshire Comets. Their seeker is retiring this year, and since they want to retain their place at the top of their league, they are looking for a top talent to replace her. The other is with England's national team. You'd be a reserve seeker, but there'd be plenty of opportunities for you to fill in, not to mention what you'd learn from playing with top-level players. And the way England's playing, I wouldn't be surprised if they're in the World Cup next year. Harry blinked, dazed by the unexpectedness of the offers. Playing professional Quidditch? A World Cup team? Me? Max laughed and squeezed his hand. Oh, Harry, this modesty of yours is really charming. Do you really not know how excellent a player you are? Harry flushed and gently extricated his hand. I thought I might be able to get a place as second string in a minor league, but not in any of the top teams. That's not all, Max said, beaming at Harry's bewildered delight. As your manager, I'll be able to get you the best sporting goods available. Robes, padding, practice cinches, anything you need. The endorsements will make you a household name around the wizarding world. Harry is already quite well known, McGonagall reminded him. For something he did as a baby, Minerva, Harry will be famous now for what he's doing as an adult. Harry blinked. That had always bothered him, being famous for merely surviving the Voldemort's attack. He had felt like a fraud, nearly as bad as Lockhart, as if any moment someone would reveal him to be undeserving of his fame. to earn a real reputation because of something he did, something that didn't require killing anyone, was very tempting. "And where would Mr. Potter live?" McGonagall asked. "With me, of course," Max said promptly. "I would need to relinquish my position here at Hogwarts. As Harry's manager, I would be far too busy. I thought perhaps a flat in London," he said, turning his attention back to Harry and smiling. "Of course, you'll be on the road with the team a good part of the time, but everyone needs a home base to come back to." Harry thought that home base sounded less satisfying than home, but he'd never known a true home, and anything had to be better than the Dursleys. That reminded him of something else. "And would you want a traditional Eratstes-Eromenos relationship?" Max looked a little surprised by the question. "Of course! I would hope that we'd remain friends once the contract was up, but that would be entirely up to you." "I meant sexually," Harry said bluntly. Max chuckled. "You are direct, aren't you, Harry? Very well, yes, we would have the usual sexual relationship. I assume you've read about that." Harry nodded. "Good! As you will be traveling quite a bit, I believe my requirements of you will be light. And, of course, I will not require your fidelity as long as you were discreet." "And you wouldn't be faithful to me, either." Max looked at Harry, surprised, and Harry made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "I know. That's in the manual, right?" Max grinned at Harry, looking relieved. "Ah, you are teasing me!" He waggled a finger at Harry. "You have a wicked sense of humor, my boy. I like a show of spirit, but you'll need to watch yourself in public. Wouldn't want to get a reputation for behaving improperly, now would you?" "No, I suppose not," Harry murmured. "Well then, I suppose it is all settled," Max said, rubbing his hands together delightedly. Harry looked up in a panic, wondering if he had somehow committed himself to Professor Max without realizing it, and glanced imploringly at Professor McGonagall. "Now, Max," she said reprovingly. "I know, Minerva, I know," he returned, and then winked at Harry. He did that a lot, Harry thought, and wondered if the man had some kind of problem with his eye muscles. "The formalities must be observed." "Harry," McGonagall said, focusing his attention back on her. "Professor Spindlewurm will draw up a contract stating the specifics of his offer. You'll have a month to negotiate the terms of the contract, during which I will serve as a facilitator. You may continue to see each other outside these rooms, but only in public. Private meetings are absolutely forbidden, as is explicit sexual contact. At the end of the month, just before the Easter break, you must accept or decline the contract. Do you understand?" Harry nodded. "Very well, then I believe this meeting is over. Harry, you have a meeting with the headmaster now, don't you?" Harry nodded and rose quickly. "Thank you, Professor." He gave Max a shy smile. "Professor? Max, thank you for your time and trouble." "It's no trouble, Harry," Max said genially. "Perhaps you'll let me walk you to the headmaster's office?" He guided Harry out of McGonagall's office, and as they entered the quiet hallway, breathed an exaggerated sigh of relief. "By Jupiter, I'm glad that part is over. That woman intimidates the heck out of me. I always feel like I'm misbehaving first year when I'm in her office." Harry snickered at that. "I know what you mean. Makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, too." "I certainly didn't feel comfortable enough to do this." Before Harry could do more than squeak in surprise, Max had pulled him into his arms and kissed him. Harry was more than a little stunned at receiving his first kiss from a man, but before he could decide whether he was angry or aroused, Max had released him and was grinning at him roguishly. "Sorry, Harry. Just couldn't resist another moment," Max said, not looking the least bit sorry. "You might have asked," Harry pointed out a little breathlessly. "I might have." Max reached out to run a finger along Harry's lips, and Harry had the absurd urge to lick it. "May I kiss you, Harry?" "The rules forbid intercourse, but not kissing or touching." Max held up his hands defensively. "I promise not to molest you unduly." Harry couldn't help laughing at that. "All right, then. One kiss. No groping or anything like that." "You are such a prude," Max teased, but he carefully took Harry in his arms and kissed him. The second time around was better than the first. At least this time he was prepared, and nothing like the one time he'd kissed a girl. For one thing, the body he was pressed against was roughly his own height and didn't have any soft bits to squash against him. For another, the slight scratch of beard stubble against his chin and cheek wasn't anything like a girl's soft skin. He decided that he liked being kissed by a man. Liked it a lot, and wondered idly if it would feel the same to kiss Snape, or if he liked it because it was Max. There, Max said, smiling as he slowly released Harry. Better? Yes. Max looked like he'd like to kiss him again, and while part of Harry decided that sounded just fine, the rest of him was aware that he was going to be late for his meeting with the headmaster. And Snape. I've gotta go. Max reluctantly let him go. I'll see you tomorrow, Harry. Harry nodded and hurried off towards the headmaster's office. He had a feeling that he looked like he'd been snogging and hastily tried to smooth down his unruly hair as he rode the stairs up to the door. Both Snape and Dumbledore were there when he entered. He flushed and stammered out an apology for keeping them both waiting. It's quite all right, Harry, Dumbledore said, genially. I'm aware that you've had a busy evening. In fact, Severus was just telling me that you missed dinner in the hall, so I had the house elves bring up some sandwiches. Harry looked over at the potions master, startled that Snape had noticed, and even more surprised that he'd been concerned enough about it to mention it to the headmaster. Thank you, sir. Snape waved a hand dismissively, an irritated look on his face. It would disrupt matters considerably if you fainted from hunger. Harry helped himself to a sandwich and a glass of pumpkin juice. It's very good, he said around a mouthful of food. Snape rolled his eyes. You really are an appalling brat, Potter. Harry grinned. Yeah, and it's Harry, remember? Snape noticed that Dumbledore was watching them both with interest and said hastily, I believe you were aware of the purpose behind the second meeting. Harry nodded and washed down his sandwich before replying, You're supposed to tell me in general terms what your formal offer will be. Exactly. Snape steepled his fingers together, staring at them instead of either Potter or Dumbledore. I am aware that you have not yet decided what to do with your future in the unlikely event that you should have one beyond Voldemort's demise. Harry blinked. That's bloody cold. It is the truth, Snape said. As ill-prepared as you are, Voldemort will snap you as easily as a twig. I've done all right till now, Harry said, bristling. You've been lucky till now, Snape said crisply. You cannot count on such luck to hold out in the future. And what business is it of yours? Harry retorted. Snape raised an eyebrow. If you accept a contract with me, I think it becomes very much my business. I would dislike being caught in the fallout should things go pear-shaped. Harry got it out good, I get that. I expect you would. Therefore, I offer to teach you everything I know, everything that will help you defeat Voldemort. And since I have 3 years' intimate acquaintance with the Dark Lord as his Eromenos, I believe you will agree that I know a considerable amount. Harry glanced quickly at Dumbledore, wondering if he'd known the extent of Snape's involvement with Voldemort. Catching the sorrowful look on the headmaster's face, a few of the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. No wonder Dumbledore trusted Snape explicitly. No wonder Snape always ended up doing his bidding no matter how much he bitched about it. If things had been different... He felt a touch of jealousy at that thought and looked back at Snape. Well, that might help me survive Voldemort, but it doesn't help me decide what to do with my future, does it? It gives you more time to decide and a place to stay for the duration. Harry went suddenly still. You mean I could remain here at Hogwarts? Snape gave him a look that was part amusement, part scorn. This is where I live, is it not? It would be highly inconvenient for me if you lived elsewhere. I would live here with you? This would be my home? You would live here, yes. The dungeons are quite large enough to accommodate you as well, or should you prefer, I'm certain Albus can arrange accommodations elsewhere in the castle. And what about us? Snape raised an eyebrow. Us, Mr. Potter. The Aratstes Eromenos relationship is usually a sexual one, Harry pointed out. Dryly, Snape said, I would hardly require you to sacrifice your virginity on the altar of tradition, Potter. Harry flushed, wondering how Snape had guessed that he was a virgin, but raised his chin defiantly. And if I choose to make such a sacrifice? Evading the subject, Snape said, There is one other matter, that of your mother's manuscript. Harry had opened his mouth to continue arguing about their sexual relationship, and he closed it now with an audible snap. Although the text is somewhat dated, the workmanship is solid. It will take very little to update it. Snape tilted his head slightly, studying Harry, as he added, I believe that Miss Granger would be willing to assist in the endeavor. Once it is ready, I have connections in the publishing world, which I would be willing to use to make certain it is published. You would? Harry asked. He knew his voice sounded unsteady, but he didn't care. Yes. His eyes locked with Harry's. It's time that Lily Evans' work was given the credit she deserves. She should be remembered for more than the sacrifice of her life. Harry winced at the reminder, but for the first time since he'd learned of his mother's death while protecting him, he felt as if he had a way to repay her in part.
Well, I believe that is enough for tonight, Dumbledore said quickly. Severus, if you will draw up the contract offer for Harry, I will see that he receives it. Harry, you are aware of the parameters of conduct for both parties from now until the contract is either accepted or declined.
Harry nodded.
Very well then. As it is drawing close to curfew, perhaps you'd be good enough to escort Mr. Potter to the Gryffindor Tower, Severus.
Snape said, Certainly, Albus. Harry started to protest that he could find his own way to the dorm, but reconsidered. He doubted that Snape wanted some time alone to snog, as Max had, but Harry wanted a chance to discuss their potential relationship, despite Snape's obvious reluctance. As the door closed behind them, he said in a deceptively innocent voice, Max kissed me tonight. About to step off onto the moving stairs, Snape suddenly froze. He did. Twice, Harry said blithely. It wasn't that bad either. He stepped onto the stairs and was surprised as Snape suddenly swooped down on him. He found himself abruptly pressed up against the wall by a tall, lean body, Snape's face close to his own and his eyes widened. And how exactly did Max kiss you? Snape murmured, his voice low and sultry as he stared down at Harry. The younger wizard was terrified and excited at the same time, unable to reply, but it didn't seem that Snape required an answer. Did he kiss you softly, gently, chastely, savoring the incandescence of your innocence, like this? Snape brushed feather-light kisses over Harry's lips, moving so quickly that it was like being kissed by butterfly wings. A lithe tongue swept over his lips and dipped inside his mouth, then out again as quickly as a hummingbird sipping nectar. It was heady, exciting, and Harry tried to follow that tempting mouth as it pulled away, but Snape had it pinned against the wall and he couldn't move. Or did he kiss you like an impatient lover, eager for the taste of your mouth and your skin? Snape's mouth was back again, this time kissing him with the ease of an experienced lover, seducing his mouth with clever nips and sucks. Even as Harry responded, opening his mouth for more of these heady kisses, a corner of his mind wondered how many men Snape had kissed and possessed, and why he was so determined to reject Harry. A spark of anger flared inside him. When Snape finally released him, he said a little breathlessly, Max said he wouldn't require my fidelity as long as I was discreet. Would you be as liberally minded? Snape's eyes glittered, and he pressed Harry even harder against the wall. I believe you would find that I am not inclined to share, Mr. Potter. What I take, I keep. Once more, Snape's mouth possessed him, but this time with an intensity that lit a fire deep within Harry's belly. A knee insinuated itself between his legs, and Harry couldn't help gasping as he felt it rub against his hardening prick. And when had that happened? He wondered dazedly. Even as he pressed closer to the body undulating against him, Snape's mouth was devouring him from the outside in. His hands were everywhere. The earth was moving around them, and Harry never wanted it to stop. The sudden climax of his body took him by surprise, and he sagged in Snape's arms, feeling boneless. That deep voice was murmuring in his ear, and he wanted to drown in its velvety tones. Now do you understand the dangers of playing with fire, little boy? Before Harry could coax a reply from his remaining brain cells, Snape was striding off in a flurry of black, leaving Harry propped against the gargoyle with no clear recollection of how he had gotten to the bottom of the stairs. His head was spinning, his mouth felt bruised, his pants were uncomfortably sticky, and he had never felt better in all of his life.